City, Denver, Colorado, October 3rd, 2018. It was a cold fall night in Denver. The leaves on the trees were beginning to change color, and the air was filled with that fresh smell that only autumn brings. Young Emily Johnson, 16, was returning home after a long afternoon of studying at the library. Emily was an ordinary teenager, with good grades at school and many friends. She lived with her mother, Sarah, and her uncle, Mark, who had moved into their house after their divorce. Emily had a well-established routine. After school, I would spend a few hours in the library before returning home. Sarah always made sure Emily texted her when she was on her way, but that night, no text arrived. When the clock struck 7 p.m., Sarah began to worry. Emily was always punctual and never failed to let us know if there were any delays. Sarah tried calling Emily's cell phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried not to panic and figured Emily's phone might be out of battery. By 8 p.m., Sarah was panicking. She decided to call some of Emily's friends, but no one knew where she was. No one had seen or spoken to Emily since she left the library. Sarah's concern grew. She knew something was wrong. Desperate, Sarah decided to call the police. The officer who responded to the call asked several questions and asked Sarah to come to the police station to file a report. Sarah got in her car and quickly drove there. Along the way, I couldn't stop imagining the worst. At the police station, Sarah met Detective John Harris, a middle-aged man with a serious, experienced look. He listened intently as Sarah told him about Emily's disappearance, taking detailed notes. "We're going to do everything we can to find your daughter," Harris said in a tone of voice that tried to be comforting, even though he knew well how critical the first 24 hours were in a missing persons case. Meanwhile, Mark, Emily's uncle, was at home. He looked worried, but tried to remain calm. When Sarah called to inform him of her disappearance, he said he would be back immediately. Arriving home, Mark tried to comfort Sarah, but he himself seemed very shaken. He claimed he was working late and hadn't seen Emily since the morning. The night passed slowly, with Sarah and Mark waiting for news. The hours seemed to drag by, and every time the phone rang, their hearts leapt with hope and fear. But dawn brought only silence and more uncertainty. The next day, the police began the investigation. They visited Emily's school, questioned her friends, and searched the library for clues. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but all signs pointed to Emily simply disappearing on her way home. Detective Harris knew he had to act quickly. He set up a team dedicated to the case and ordered posters with Emily's photo to be distributed throughout the city. The community mobilized, and within hours, posters were on every corner, store window, and bus stop. Meanwhile, Sarah clung to any ray of hope, spending hours on the phone, calling friends, relatives, and anyone who might have seen her daughter. Mark tried to be as helpful as possible, but something about his behavior began to catch Detective Harris's attention. Sarah's nightmare was just beginning. The search for Emily was in full swing, but the answers were still far away, hidden in the shadows of a cold October night. The morning of October 4th started out gray, with heavy clouds covering the Denver sky. Sarah hadn't slept at all. She stayed up all night, waiting for any news from Emily. However, the only thing that came was oppressive silence. The police were on high alert, and Detective John Harris knew every minute counted. Harris began the investigation by visiting Emily's school. He spoke to teachers, friends, and staff. Everyone had the same answer. Emily was an exemplary student, loved by everyone and never caused problems. No one could imagine why she would disappear. Next, Harris went to the library where Emily had been the previous afternoon. The librarian remembered seeing her leaving around 6 p.m. Security cameras showed Emily leaving the building, but after that, there was no record of her. The next step was to interrogate the family. Harris returned to the Johnson house, where Sarah and Mark were anxiously waiting for news. Sarah was exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying. Mark looked tense, but was determined to help. "Mr. Johnson," began Harris, addressing Mark, "can you tell me about your night last night? Where were you after work?" Mark took a deep breath before responding. "I was at the office late. I left around 7:30 and went straight home. I haven't seen Emily since the morning." Harris wrote down the information, but something about Mark's behavior bothered him. He seemed nervous, and his answers were short, as if he was hiding something. "Do you have any idea where Emily could have gone? Somewhere she frequents or friends she could be visiting?" Harris asked. "She usually goes straight home from the library. I don't know why she didn't come back yesterday. I'm just as confused as you are, Detective, Mark said, rubbing his forehead. Harris decided to take another path. He asked to examine Emily's room, looking for any clues that could explain her disappearance. Emily's room was exactly what he expected for a teenager. Posters on the wall, an organized study desk, and a bed covered in colorful pillows. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Harris knew that clues often lay in the smallest details. He found Emily's diary. Although he respected privacy, he knew the diary could contain crucial information. Flipping through the pages, he found notes about school, friends, and typical teenage concerns. However, one entry caught her attention. Emily mentioned that she was worried about something related to her Uncle Mark, but didn't specify what it was. This discovery made Harris decide to look deeper into Mark's past. He discovered that Mark had a history of aggressive behavior and a restraining order from his ex-wife, which had not previously been mentioned. This made Harris look at Mark with more suspicion. Meanwhile, the search for Emily continued. Volunteers joined police officers, searching parks, streets, and isolated areas. The community was mobilized, but each hour that passed without new information increased Sarah's despair. At the police station, Harris gathered his team to discuss next steps. We need a warrant to search Mark's car and house. Something isn't right, and we can't ignore these leads, he said firmly. Officers quickly obtained the warrant and returned to the Johnson home. Mark tried to remain calm, but his tension was visible. They started with the car. Harris thoroughly inspected every corner until he found something that made his heart race. Emily's cell phone was hidden in the trunk, along with blood stains. Mr. Johnson, we need you to come with us to the station for further questions, Harris said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Mark tried to protest, but he knew he was in a difficult situation. He was taken to the police station, where the interrogation intensified. Under pressure, Mark began to contradict himself, further increasing suspicions against him. Meanwhile, Sarah was at home, trying to deal with the new wave of terror. She could hardly believe that her brother could be involved in her daughter's disappearance. But as more evidence emerged, the truth began to seem inevitable. The investigation was just beginning, and Harris knew she had a long way to go to uncover the truth and bring justice for Emily. With each step, the case became darker, and the detective prepared to face the worst. The case of Emily Johnson's disappearance was becoming increasingly complex. The discovery of Emily's cell phone and the bloodstains in Mark's car brought a new layer of urgency to the investigation. Detective John Harris knew he needed to act quickly to find Emily and understand what had really happened. The first few days after the discovery were intense. Mark was being held for questioning, but continued to maintain that he was innocent. He insisted that the bloodstains in the car were from an accidental cut Emily suffered weeks earlier, and that he had no idea how her cell phone got there. Harris wasn't convinced, but he knew he needed more hard evidence. Meanwhile, police continued to search the city. They revisited the school, the library, and the surrounding area, looking for anything they might have missed. Community volunteers didn't give up either, and the search for Emily became increasingly desperate. It was then that an unexpected witness appeared. A neighbor who lived on the same street as Sarah and Mark came forward to police with crucial information. He claimed to have seen Emily getting into Mark's car on the night of her disappearance. This contradicted Mark's story and gave the investigation a new direction. Detective Harris decided to look deeper into Mark's past. He discovered that Mark had a history of aggressive behavior and a restraining order from his ex-wife, information he had withheld during early interrogations. This made Harris look at Mark with even more suspicion. With the new information from the neighbor, Harris obtained a warrant to search Mark's house. During the search, they found a notebook hidden in Mark's room. The notebook contained disturbing notes, including drawings and descriptions of Emily. The notes indicated a growing obsession Mark had with his niece. Confronted with this new evidence, Mark began to contradict himself even more during interrogations. He first said that the notes were just personal reflections, and that he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. But mounting pressure prompted him to reveal more details. Mark finally confessed that on the night of his disappearance, he and Emily had a heated argument. He admitted he took her to a secluded location to talk, but said Emily got out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. He claimed he tried to look for her but couldn't find her and, in a panic, decided not to tell anyone, fearing he would be accused of something he didn't do. Although Mark's confession was a breakthrough, Harris knew there were still important pieces of the puzzle missing. They needed to find Emily, dead or alive, to understand the whole truth. It was then that an anonymous call changed the course of the investigation. A nervous voice on the other end of the line informed the police of a location in the woods, a few miles outside of town, where they had seen something suspicious. Harris and his team followed up on the lead immediately. When they arrived at the indicated location, they found an isolated and dense area, difficult to access. After hours of searching, they finally found something that chilled Harris's blood. Emily's body, partially buried under leaves and branches. She was injured, but signs indicated that she had fought valiantly before succumbing. The discovery of Emily's body was devastating for Sarah and the entire Denver community. The case took on national proportions, with the media covering every detail. Mark was formally charged with kidnapping and murder, and the investigation continued to put all the final pieces together. For Detective Harris, Emily Johnson's case would never be just another in his career. The clues and revelations over the days had uncovered not only the tragedy of a young life cut short, but also the dark secrets that can lurk within families. The truth, although painful, finally came to light, bringing a sense of justice, however belated, to Emily and all those who loved her. The silence in the interrogation room was deafening. Mark Johnson was sitting at the table, handcuffed, staring at the floor. Across the table, Detective John Harris watched Mark's every move and expression, looking for any sign of remorse or regret. "Mark, you know why you're here," Harris began, breaking the silence. "The evidence is overwhelming. We found Emily's body, and we know you were with her the night she disappeared." Mark raised his head slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and challenge. "I already told you what happened. I didn't hurt Emily. I just wanted to talk to her." "To talk?" Harris replied, his voice thick with skepticism. "The marks on Emily's body say something else. She fought, Mark. She fought for her life." Mark looked away again, muttering something inaudible. Harris knew he needed to tighten his grip. He got up and started pacing around the room. "You're not telling the whole truth, Mark. We know about your history of violence. We know about your obsession with Emily. And now she's dead. You need to be honest. Why did you take Emily to that place?" Mark started to sweat. He breathed heavily, trying to maintain his composure. I didn't want to hurt her. I loved Emily. But she didn't understand. She wanted to tell her mother everything, and I couldn't let that happen." Harris stopped walking and faced Mark directly. "So you decided to end her life? To protect your sick secret?" "No," Mark shouted, slamming his fists on the table. "It was an accident. I just wanted to talk. She tried to run away. I tried to hold her, and everything got out of control." Harris knew this was his chance to get a full confession. "Mark, the evidence is against you. The bloodstains in your car, Emily's cell phone, your notes. It all points to you. If you want to have any chance at redemption, you need to tell the whole truth now." Mark began to cry, his resistance finally breaking. I was angry. I didn't want her to tell her mother anything. I tried to make her understand, but she wouldn't listen. When she tried to run away, I held her too tightly. She fell and crashed, head. When I realized it was already too late. Detective Harris felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Mark's confession brought an end to the mystery, but not the suffering. Emily was dead, and nothing could change that. "Why didn't you ask for help? Why did you decide to hide the body?" Harris asked, still wanting to understand the extent of Mark's coldness. "I panicked," Mark replied, his voice weak. "I knew no one would believe me. I knew it would be the end for me." The interrogation continued for a few more hours, with Mark revealing every detail of that fateful night. His every word was recorded, every inconsistency scrutinized. In the end, Harris had what he needed: a detailed confession that would ensure Mark was brought to justice. As Mark was taken back to his cell, Harris sat at his desk, exhausted. Emily Johnson's case had come to a tragic end, but at least the truth had been revealed. Sarah Johnson received the news with a heavy heart. The pain of losing his daughter was unbearable, and his own brother's betrayal made it even worse. The Denver community came together to support Sarah, but everyone knew the scar from that event would remain forever. In court, Mark was convicted of kidnapping and murder, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, but the price was high. For Detective John Harris, Emily Johnson's case would not be forgotten. He promised himself that he would continue to fight for justice for all the victims, carrying with him Emily's memory and the promise that he would do everything in his power to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. News of Mark Johnson's conviction spread quickly throughout Denver. The city, still in shock, was trying to recover from the tragedy that shook the community. Yet for Sarah Johnson, the pain of losing her daughter and her brother's betrayal continued to be an unbearable burden. At the police station, Detective John Harris couldn't stop thinking about the case. Something didn't feel right. Despite Mark's confession, Harris felt there was more to the story. He decided to revisit all the evidence, looking for any details that might have been overlooked. It was then that a new clue emerged. A forensic technician, reviewing data from Emily's cell phone, found deleted messages that were recovered. The messages were between Emily and an unknown number. Conversations indicated that Emily was seeing someone other than her uncle. Harris decided to track the number, discovering that it belonged to a man named Jason Miller, a former co-worker of Mark's. Jason had a criminal history, including accusations of harassment and violence. This completely changed the perspective of the case. Harris went to Jason's house to question him. Upon arriving, he found a nervous man, who initially denied any involvement with Emily. However, when confronted with the messages, Jason began to waver. "I knew Emily, yes," Jason admitted, his voice shaking, "but I didn't do anything to her. We just talked." "What were they talking about, Jason?" Harris asked, leaving no room for evasions. "She was scared of her uncle," Jason replied, reluctantly. "She said he was becoming increasingly possessive and wanted to leave the house." Harris felt he was getting closer to the truth. He pressed Jason for more details, and finally, Jason revealed something that changed everything. "The night she disappeared, Emily texted me that she was going to meet Mark. I went after her, but when I got there, I saw Mark dragging Emily's body to the car. He saw me and threatened to frame me if I said something." With this new information, Harris knew he needed to act quickly. He called Jason to the stand and reopened the case with the new angle. In court during the retrial, Jason testified against Mark. He described what he saw the night Emily disappeared, adding a new dimension to the case. Mark's defense tried to discredit Jason, but the messages recovered from Emily's cell phone were irrefutable evidence. Additionally, closer analysis of the location where Emily's body was found revealed traces of DNA that belonged to Jason. This confirmed his presence at the crime scene and corroborated his story. During the reinterrogation, Mark was confronted with the new evidence. Under intense pressure and in the face of incontrovertible evidence, he finally broke down and admitted the full truth. "I didn't want to hurt her," Mark confessed, "but when she said she was going to tell everything, I panicked. I knew Jason was there, but I used that to my advantage. I told him that if he talked, I would frame him too. I was desperate." The revelation shocked everyone. The ultimate truth was that Mark, in his desperation and obsession, had tried to control Emily, and when she resisted, he killed her. Jason, although initially a bystander, became complicit in hiding the truth. With Mark's full confession and Jason's cooperation, the case was finally solved. Mark was convicted of murder and kidnapping, while Jason, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence for obstruction of justice and complicity. For Sarah, revealing the truth brought a mixture of relief and pain. Justice for Emily had been achieved, but the price was too high. The Denver community, despite the tragedy, came together even more, pledging to protect each other and keep Emily's memory alive. For Detective John Harris, Emily Johnson's case was a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, must always come out. He would continue his mission to seek justice, safe in the knowledge that even in the darkest situations, truth and justice can prevail.